All right, looking at the book of Micah, continuing in the book of Micah, and there's a lot about the book of Micah that concerns judgment upon the northern kingdom that had already taken place. Micah is somewhere around 701 BC, and the northern kingdom went in captivity in 721, so 20 years prior to that. But God continued to use them as illustration to Judah, to warn Judah that the same thing can happen to you that happened to them. And so it was very, very important. Last week, Mike, did we get to this screen here?
Let me see.
I think we did.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
No, yeah. Yeah, right here. Here it is.
Is that the last thing?
Against the, let's see,
You-
the lesson, ultimate blessings on
Oh,
God.
okay.
That's what we gonna start.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we're gonna start.
All right, you remember, God promised Abraham, in the Abraham covenant, that he would make a great nation that would come from him. And that was an unconditional covenant that God made. We go back to Genesis 15, look at that Abraham offering up a sacrifice, waiting for God, waiting so long that he has to start shooing the birds away, and then finally God causes a sleep to fall upon Abraham, and then God passed through the sacrifice. Showing that the covenant had nothing to do with Abraham as a part of it. The covenant was just by God. God said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a great nation, and that nation ultimately will be the center of the world. Jerusalem will be the capital of the whole world in the millennial kingdom. And so Israel knew that, and that's why a lot of times God repeats himself to them, because like going to captivity. Well, how can we go into captivity? We're your favorite people. It is their attitude. And God didn't say that they would not go into captivity. He didn't say they would go in judgment. In fact, in Genesis 15, when God ratifies the covenant with Abraham, one of the first things he says is that they're going to spend 400 years in Egypt. So judgment doesn't mean that God won't keep his promise. And that's why the new covenant, as found in the book of Hebrews, we talked about last week, that is so important to the Jews of the early church, and even today. Because there are Jewish people who may look at the church and thinking, but what about us? What about Israel? God promised in the Old Testament, and so the book of Hebrews explains that the new covenant, which has not gone to an effect yet, it is not the covenant that we're in. The new covenant is to the house of Israel and to the house of Judah. And God will write in their hearts the law. There'll be no reason to teach anybody to know the Lord, for they'll all know me. But that definitely is not going on today. But in the millennial kingdom, when people live in Israel, the Jews who will live in Israel, and Jesus will be there and ruling from the temple, there'll be no reason to tell anybody to know who Jesus is, because everybody's going to know who I am at that point. And so God promises in judgment for their sin, but he also promises in blessing upon his people. Now, in Micah's time, there was no justice, no law, no word from God. As such, God tried to communicate with them, but if they don't want to hear it, they're not going to hear it. Remember what God said in Zechariah? God said, I called unto you and you would not hear. Now, when you call unto me, I won't hear. But in the future, there'll be no temple and even no Jerusalem as such to protect them. But in the last days, there'll be prosperity, true justice. There will be peace on the earth. You know, if you really start thinking about the millennial kingdom, that should excite you.
It does.
You know, and you think about what life will be like. I mean, we will be there in glorified bodies. And I don't know what all that means. I don't know if we'll sleep and eat and all. I assume that we will. We will rule with Jesus, whatever he appoints us to do at that point. And there'll be others in the world as well. The lost people, the saved people who survived the tribulation period, and then their children will be there. You can lie down with a lion and it won't hurt you. I mean, you know, I looked at these, in fact, I was watching some the other day, it had a tiger on there. And those are just absolutely beautiful, beautiful animals. I mean, it'd be so neat to be able to just go over and hug one. But today, it's not advisable. But in the millennial kingdom, you could do that. It'd just be great.
Dr. K, is it true, I'm asking a question now, is it true that in the beginning, before what happened in the garden, that the animals were supposed to be that way in the very beginning, you know, where
A man had dominion over them
over them,
at that
okay.
point. And up to the flood,
Mm-hmm,
all the animals, no animal ate meat.
okay,
It wasn't until after the flood that they began to eat meat.
okay,
So it wasn't a dangerous time for Adam and Eve as such.
okay.
I'm not sure exactly how all it worked, because the Bible doesn't go into great detail, but yes, it'll be more like the millennial kingdom, I think.
Okay,
Because I think the millennial kingdom will bear a lot of resemblance to pre-flood earth. Even the topography of the earth talks about the hills lowering, the valleys rising. It won't be exactly like it was, because now the continents are divided, and pre-flood there were no continents as such. So it's just be very, very interesting to see, very exciting, if you think about it. I mean, I believe we're living in the last days, and I believe very soon, very likely we could be raptured out even today. I believe that. But nevertheless, I think the end time is soon. So it gives us something to really look forward to, be excited about. The coming kingdom in chapter 4, remember, again, the Jews are thinking if we're being judged and what's going to happen to us, has God forsaken us? No, He's not. And Paul even dealt with that in the book of Romans with the Jewish people, wondering if God had forsaken them. He basically said, guess what? I'm a Jew. You know, so can Jews get saved? Absolutely. I mean, the very foundation of the church was Jewish. I mean, almost everybody in the original church in Acts chapter 2, probably everybody. I can't say 100% because there may be some Gentiles who converted to Judaism. But the characteristics of the kingdom. In Micah chapter 4. It says, but in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. Talking about Jerusalem here. And many nations shall come and say, come and let's go up to the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So we're talking about millennial kingdom here, and talking about the mountains. And if you go to Israel, when you go to Jerusalem, one thing you'll notice is that you're going uphill. Right, that's the mountain. Psalm 121, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord. And so looking to the temple, that's what Psalm 121 was, one of the psalms of degree that they sang as they entered into Jerusalem. They lift their eyes into the hills. It wasn't the hills that gave them help. It wasn't even the temple that gave them help, but it was the presence of God in the temple. And this references that the presence of God would very much be in the temple in those days, Jesus Christ. And he shall judge among many people and rebuke strong nations afar off, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares. Now remember, Joel words it differently. Plowshares and swords, because he's talking about the tribulation period. Well, Mike is not talking about the tribulation period, he's talking about the millennial kingdom. This is not for today. I know there's an old spiritual about beating your, I can't remember how the song went now, but basically about beating your swords into plowshares for today. That would be nice, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I mean, when we were kids, used to be a game we played, and it was, you'd say, you want to play a game? And yeah, let's see who can hit the lightest. Okay, and you say, you go first, and you hit the lights, and they barely touch, and then you just haul off and hit them hard, and then say, oh, you won. You know, because that's the way people are. There's going to be war until the millennial kingdom, and there's nothing we're going to do about that. What's going on in Ukraine today, if that's not happening, then someplace else is going to happen. There's always going to be wars. But in the millennial kingdom, they will learn more no more. But they shall sit every man up under his vine, under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Again, think about the millennial kingdom here, that I don't think you're going to need locks. You don't need to worry about that. You won't have to worry about safety. I mean, one of the things when we bought the vehicle that my wife bought here recently is that the gas cap was on the driver's side, and you have to think about stuff like that. Because it's that way if something happens, you can get back in the car quick. If it's on the other side, somebody can get in the car and drive off. So you have to really think about these things. And in the millennial kingdom, you won't have to. For all the people walk, everyone in the name of his God, and we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. In that day saith Lord, I will assemble her that halteth, and I will gather her that is driven out, and her that I have afflicted, and I will make her that halteth a remnant, and her that was cast far off a strong nation. And the Lord shall reign over them in Mount Zion from henceforth, even forever. And thou, O tower of the flock, the stronghold of the daughters of Zion, unto thee shall it come, even the first dominion, the kingdom shall come to the daughter of Jerusalem. So again, the absolute promise of the restoration of Israel, and we see very much the Jerusalem as paramount in that, the world center at that point. And that's one thing. I don't know all the politics of Israel as far as politics and all that. I don't know Yitzhak being the only prime minister that was assassinated in November of '95. He was too willing to give parts of Israel away to the Palestinians. He had wanted to give the Mount of Olives to them, and he also wanted to give the Golan Heights, which that's where their water comes from. To me, that would be scary, to turn your water supply over to your enemy. He wanted to do it. His belief was that if we give in, then they'll give in, and we can just live together peacefully. And that sounds great, but that's not the way it works. Netanyahu, who was the prime minister, made the statement that Jerusalem belongs to Israel because God gave it to us. Well, he's right in that. Now, that doesn't mean that God wouldn't kick him out of Jerusalem. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, that's already happened in history. But according to Scriptures, Israel should be the capital. In the present response in light of Jerusalem's future glory, how should we, what does that mean to the people of the day? Again, it says, but in the last day it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow into it. That's what I just read. But again, just for reference here, the mountain of the house of the Lord being the temple, and many nations shall come during that time. Like Zechariah 14 tells us that if a nation during the millennial kingdom does not send representatives to Jerusalem during some holy days, that God will send a drought into the land, or famine into it. So, in the very beginning, we know in the millennial kingdom that things are going to be great, because for the day one of the millennial kingdom, the people that are there are all saved people. We were there in glorified bodies. So day one, there's everybody saved. But as time goes on, and there will be sin in the millennial kingdom. Right? Not like it is today, but there will be sin. And you're talking 1,000 years, so somewhere along the line, people are going to rebel. We know that when Satan is loosed, the Bible says that he will go to the four corners of the earth and gather all the lost people, whose number will be as the sands of the sea. So at the end of 1,000 years, worldwide there will be a lot of lost people, meaning that some of these people will end up in government positions or what have you, because Zechariah says that if they don't send representatives, God will send drought or famine into the land. That means that some nations probably will not follow God's command as a whole. Sin will still be there. Eventually, though, of course, at the in the millennial kingdom, second Gog and Magog war, when Jesus then cast them all into the lake of fire.
And this is when Jesus is in Jerusalem,
Yeah,
ruling from the temple, and all of these sinful people.
still there.
And Jesus is ready on earth.
Yeah. Well, same thing happened the first time, didn't it?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. But yeah, you would think people would have enough sense.
Yeah.
And like I say in the beginning, I'm sure they will. I mean, we can even see it in our lifetime, a huge difference of what it was like before and now as far as sin is more and more and more and more rampant.
Yes.
30, 40 years ago, we didn't have the problems we have today. I mean, yes, there was sin, and yes, there was murder, and there was some things going on, but it's just multiplied more and more and more. And on this path, it's no telling what life will be like 30 years from now. I mean, because unless revival takes place, I wouldn't want to live here. I worry about my grandchildren, what they're going to be facing. I do, because who knows? In chapter 4, second part of verse 2, to verse 4 says, "And he will teach us his ways, we walk in the path, for the law will go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and he shall judge among many people, and rebuke strong nations afar off, and again beat their swords into plowshares." And then 4:5, "For all people will walk every one in the name of his God, and we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever." So I assume the first part is referencing to lost people, because again, people that are born in the millennial kingdom will have to accept. But we will walk in the name of our Lord Jehovah forever and ever. In the restoration of Israel, here we see in chapter 4, verse 6, the gathering of the nations. There are organizations that you can give to now, National Christian and Jew, something, I don't know what they call it now. And a lot of them are raising money to send, to help former Soviet Union Jews to go back to Israel. And they put references down from the Bible in their ministries doing that, showing that as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And it's not. Now, I don't have a problem in helping former Soviet Union Jews go back to Israel, because many of them are living in poverty-stricken areas that if they were able to get to Israel, they could get help and they could survive. So I don't have a problem with giving to things like that in and of itself. However, what they're doing does not fulfill any prophecy. So I think the word they use is aliyah, A-L-I-Y-A-H, I'm not mistaken, something like that, which means it's a Hebrew word for flight. And so they're saying that today we see that the Jews return to Israel is a fulfillment, like I say, they say is a fulfillment of prophecy, and it is not. This gathering of the nation will take place with the new covenant. God said, remember, in the new covenant, I will gather together again the house of Israel and the house of Jacob. That will take place in the millennial kingdom. So the Jews will return to Israel. I think, as far as I can see, the tribulation saints very likely could be, I'm not sure what their part will be in the millennial kingdom. It'll be a little bit different than us because we're the bride of Christ and they're part of the Old Testament in a sense. But the established Jerusalem again as the capital of the world. Remember the millennial temple will be there. I believe the heavenly temple will come down to the earth and Jesus will reign from that temple for 1,000 years. And of course, obviously, the transformation of the nation of Israel. Things are going to change so much. It'll be a very exciting time for us. And that day saith Lord, will I assemble her that halts, and I will gather her that is driven out, and her that I have afflicted. So nations that have been judged before, or chastened before, God will gather. I'll make her that halts a remnant, and her that was cast far off a strong nation. And the Lord shall reign over them in Mount Zion. So judgment of nations we will look at in Matthew 25 as part of that. And thou, O tower of the flock, the stronghold of the daughter of Zion, unto thee shall it come. Even the first dominion, the king shall come to the daughters of Jerusalem. So that's the main place of ruling from. But there are events that took place, that actually has taken place now. When this was written, it had not taken place. The Judas Captivity. Remember, 606 BC marked the beginning of the Babylonian captivity. So we're in 701 right now, BC, give or take. 95 years later, Judah will suffer a great captivity. For the northern kingdom, it says 1 out of 10 would survive, 10%. For the southern kingdom, 1/3 would survive. Isaiah predicts the same thing. Remember, Isaiah and Micah are contemporaries, meaning that they both preached during the same time. Micah preached to the common person, and Isaiah more to royalty. Again, promise of captivity because of sin, but also the promise of restoration. They're gathering from Babylon. We know they went in 606 BC. We know that Cyrus sent out a decree to allow the Jews to return. I think it was 539 BC, but that was 3 years too soon. The Jews did not actually leave until 536 BC, which meant that from 606 to 536 was 70 years. Of course, to go back and rebuild the temple. Which eventually was accomplished 20 years later.
It's almost like Judah didn't learn anything from what happened to the northern kingdom.
There were times of revival with some of the good kings, Hezekiah and Josiah from this point, but pretty much that's it. And so the nation didn't really learn much. It's like, I'm sure the southern kingdom thought, well, yeah, but they deserve punishment, we don't. And that's the way mankind tends to be.
Dr. K, as we would say, they didn't have an attitude of gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. And thou, tower of the flock, the stronghold of the daughter of Zion, unto thee shall it come. Even the first dominion, we read this verse the other day, but again, the first dominion, the king shall come to the daughter of Jerusalem. Now why dost thou cry aloud? Is there no king in thee? Is thy counselor perished? For pangs have taken thee as a woman in travail. Be in pain, labor to bring forth, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in travail. For now shalt thou go forth out of the city, and thou shalt dwell in the field, and shalt go even to Babylon. So here, again, you think about how amazing this prophecy is. Because Babylon wasn't a nation. Babylon wasn't a power. They were not worried about Babylon. They were worried about Assyria. Assyria and Babylon are not the same thing. Babylon may have been a small little place at this time, but eventually it became a country that was able to defeat Assyria. And so the people listening to this might think, why do we have to worry about Babylon? But God obviously knew exactly what he would do, and he selected Babylon to be the one to take Judah into captivity. Babylon couldn't take Judah into captivity unless God allowed it to happen. I mean, just like they could not have put Jesus on the cross without Jesus' permission. He gave his life. They didn't take his life, he gave his life. Be in pain, labor to bring forth, O daughter, thou be delivered, therefore the Lord shall redeem thee from the hands of thy enemies. So, yes, the judgment's coming, judgment hit, but God says, I will redeem you out. Judah's enemies, of course, remember one of the common themes throughout the Old Testament with the prophets is the judging of nations. And the nations were all judged primarily off of the Abrahamic covenant. I will bless them that bless thee, curse them that curse thee. So when the surrounding nations of Israel, when Syria or Moab or Ammon or Egypt, other nations, what the other nations are, Edom, what have you, it's usually reference of what they did to Israel. And here we have nations around him gloating. And I think you deserve what you got. Oh. But God also promised that those nations that gloat will be judged. Again, going back to the Abrahamic covenant, the judgment of nations.
And those are the nations of refuge.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the nations of refuge? The different nations that you were just naming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, any nation that gloats or mistreats Israel, then and now, the Abraham covenant wasn't only for a certain amount of time. It goes on forever. Judah's leadership, the present subjection of Judah's kings, and we'll see that the times of the Gentiles is a biblical phrase that we use to describe the Gentile rule over Israel. And at this point in time, that has not taken place in 701, but it begins in 606 BC, when the Babylonian captivity begins. When Babylon started ruling over them, or then Persia overruling them, then Greece, Greek Empire ruling over the Roman Empire ruling over them. And even to this day, Israel is not able to stand alone. They need help from other nations. And that will be true, of course, obviously in the millennial or tribulation period, that will be true. So this continues to the second coming. But God also promised the deliverance of the Jews' kings. We know that David one day will reign on the throne in Jerusalem as well. The promise of Jesus, promise of Messiah coming to them. So much that God has planned here. Now gathered thyself in troops, O daughters of troops, he hath laid siege against us. They shall smite the judge of Israel with a rod upon the cheek. Israel, whose going forth had been from old, from everlasting, gives them up, until the time that she which travails hath brought the remnant of the people shall return, and the children of Israel. Yeah, fix that screen just right. But nevertheless, the prophecy here. They shall waste the land of Syria with the land of Nimrod and the entrance thereof. Thus shall he deliver us from when he cometh into our land, when he treads. So again, prophecy fulfilled. Characteristics of this kingdom shall be, set that screen right so the scriptures can in front of it. It says that the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people, as a dew from the Lord, as the showers upon the grass, that tarrieth not for man, nor waits for the sons of men. And the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles, in the midst of many people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest, as a young lion among the flocks of sheep. Who if he go through, both treads down and tears in pieces, and none can deliver. Thy hand shall be lifted up upon thine adversaries, and all thy enemies shall be cut off. And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord, that I will cut off thy horses out of the midst of thee, and I will destroy thy chariots. I will cut off the cities of thy land, and throw down all thy strongholds. And I will cut off witchcrafts out of thine hand, and thou shalt have no more soothsayers. Thy graven images also will I cut off, and thy standing images out of the midst of thee, and thou shalt no more worship the work of thy hands. And I will pluck up thy groves out of the midst of thee, so I will destroy thy cities. Remember, the groves are places of idol worship. And I will execute vengeance and anger and fury upon the heathen, such as they never heard. So, God's judgment is sure and it's coming. But again, the promise of restoration. Israel here is pictured as a blessing, but then, again, that's the Abraham covenant, isn't it? I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee, and in thee shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. We have the Israel picture like a dew. For land, also pictures like a lion of the tribe of Judah. We talk about Jesus there. So it's their divine source of existence. When you think about Israel from just a human standpoint, a nation that in 70 A.D. the Roman general Titus came in and kicked all the Jews out, destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, everything completely gone at that point. Jews forced to move to wherever they did. And then in 1948, from 70 AD to 1948, they were allowed to be called a nation again. It doesn't make a lot of sense from a human standpoint. I mean, why are there even Jewish people today? Why have they not just been bred into other nations and become what have you? It doesn't make any sense. A nation that was not a nation for basically 1900 years still wants to be a nation and became a nation. There's no other group of people like that. There's none. I mean, I remember back in the 60s with George Wallace and all the racial things going on at that time, and people were telling that black people should go back to Africa. As far as I know, there's only one person in this room who could go back to Africa. And that's me. Because y'all haven't been to Africa. It's not your homeland. It doesn't mean you wouldn't want to visit it, but I doubt very seriously if very many people would want to move back to Africa. There are some who do, but for the most part. Why? Because that's not your homeland. Right? Your homeland now is where you were born at. But to the Jew, Israel is their homeland. They have innate with them a desire to live there that God gave. And they're the only people like that. There's been other nations that have been kicked out of their country and they don't exist anymore. I mean, they've just gone, that's it. But for Israel, they've always maintained that. And you talk about a small population of the earth. I can't remember how many, I think it's around 8 million Jews in Israel now, with 500 million Muslims living around them. And those 500 million Muslims they're right, not all Muslims follow this. Okay, don't get me wrong, I'm not putting a blanket statement that all Muslims are like this. But those who follow the Quran teaches that you will be blessed in heaven if you kill a Jew or even a Gentile. If you kill them, then God will give you rewards in heaven for that. Now, again, that's why the suicide bombers do what they do. Most Muslims don't believe that, or they don't follow that. Most Muslims are apathetic towards it. They don't care one way or the other. But still, Israel, with 8 million and then 500 million Muslims, why don't the Muslims just walk in and take over? Who could stop them? Well, God can. And that's why Israel is what it is today. The divine promise. All right, let's take a break.